Oh!
Very
No.
Whole room.
Okay,
shook.
so I hope we're live. This is a new setup. But anyways, hi everyone. Joe here for, I guess, what is episode 102, if I'm not completely wrong, of the Upper Memory Block podcast. And I got to take these headphones off because I'm hearing myself in them because they're connected to another computer. And there we go, much better. And we're here for our 7th Hangout, in which we will be talking about, what are we going to be talking about? Feats of strength, which I think was Trolls' idea.
Ironically, because I have nothing to contribute. Really, I am very strengthless.
Well, anyway, so I guess I sort of defined feats of strength as kind of outlandish things that you've done either in gaming or, in games or in technology to get games to work or in, anything like that. Anything sort of that's like where you had to put some elbow grease, some effort, or where afterwards you were like, "Oh, well, that's impressive."
All right,
and
I actually got one or two, but I'm just on the sidelines, and I'm ready to be enlightened by people who are actually good at their junk.
Awesome. So as soon as I want to run away for one more second, we'll do introductions. But so give me a moment.
So
now I'm not streaming OBS anymore. So let's. I know we've all been here before, and some other folks might pop up as we progress. But let's go down the list and introduce ourselves as we tend to do, starting from the left of my little list here with Brian.
Hey, I'm Brian. Same as always. I think I've been on all of these Hangouts, right?
I think so.
Yep. In the Midwest, that's about all I got.
So surrounded by boxes and other various things.
Yep, all stuff for arcade games that I get to fix. So,
which is still, I say, the coolest job in the world.
I love it.
Next, we have. Whoop! Here we go. We've got another person popping in, but we will continue on with Tomer.
Hey, I'm Tomer from Israel as usual, and I'll be contributing the incessant cat meowing for this episode.
unless my cats come and do the same thing, because they're very good at that. And what was going to be finally, but isn't finally anymore, we have Trolls, who needs no introduction, but introduce yourself anyways, because you've got a lot of cool stuff that you're doing.
Hi, I'm Trolls. I may or may not be wearing pants. Let's hope no one has to find out during this hour or so that we're.
I guess that'll depend on whether or not you have to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, it's already starting to be. Anyway, I'm the Space Quest historian. I have a YouTube channel on youtube.com/SpaceQuestHistorian and a bunch of other crap that I won't bore you with.
Yay! Hey. And very recently added to the call, we have returning contributor Craig. Hey, Craig.
Hi, everyone.
How's it going? Give yourself a little intro if your voice is working.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Hi, I'm Craig. I'm an old-time gamer. That's about all I got to say.
So cool. So I guess we were going to talk about crazy stuff we've had to do, and if we run out of crazy stuff we've had to do, I'm sure we can find more than enough interesting things to discuss. So does anyone have a story to wow us with?
I've just learned. I could learn so much from you about concise introductions. I'm really terrible at those.
Really? I don't know. Backseat Designers is like pretty concise in introduction from time to time.
I think
that's because it's actually scripted.
Yeah.
Fred actually sat down and went, "Okay, we're gonna say hi to each other and just say hi and nothing else." And he was looking straight at me when he said that.
Also, I think the great feat of strength in this case is having Gareth along for the show, because he, gets you back on track.
Yes, that was
very important to have the person that sort of drags you back to where you need to be.
And he's British, so that's always a plus.
Yes.
Yeah. And especially, it's important to stay on track when you interview people like freaking John Romero. Or it was like Romero or you got Romero, not Carmack, right?
yeah, that was Romero, and that was backseatdesigners.com. If anyone is interested in listening to that, it basically consists of Fred trying to contain his drool as the man completely and utterly schools us on old school adventure games.
Of course.
Absolutely.
The basically the progenitor of the first-person shooter schooled you on adventure games.
Yes, that is exactly what happened.
Nice. All right. So getting back on track. So
Sorry for derailing that.
No, exactly. But do we have some feats of strength to talk about?
I got a few. I could. Oh, go ahead. It was your idea. You share first, man.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's all Trolls' fault if it goes wrong.
Yes, I accept full responsibility. I've only got one really of my own that I can claim as my own. So maybe I should hang on to it until everyone's.
No. Let's start with a bang. You know what? You know what's going to happen? I'm sure other people will start telling stories, and then you'll be like, "Oh God, I remember this thing." And
yeah. All right. I may even have mentioned this before, so it is really underwhelming. I got Flashback CD-ROM to work on my old 486. Which is a game that required something in the line of 611 kilobytes of free base RAM to run. And I got my mouse driver and my CD-ROM driver in there and actually managed to get the game running. And that was I have no idea.
Did you put it into the upper memory blocks?
Yeah, see, I resisted running QEMM on any of my old DOS machines because it would unilaterally fuck up, if you played One Must Fall. I can never remember the name or the year in that title, but anyway, One Must Fall.
2097.
2097. It would, completely break the game, and sprites would flicker, and the game would crash and such. So I never used QEMM.
I never got why QMM gets such a bad rap. I've had not exclusively, but predominantly really good experience with it, and it doesn't require any more hand holding than MemMaker ever did, and it's as stable for the most part. So I don't know, it just worked.
I don't know. I got very wary about it because it would always mess up my shit, and it would always crash games. And it might have been just components in my computer colliding with each other or something, but could never get it. So I got Flashback working by somehow having enough kung fu to auto-exec bat and config sys my machine into getting 611K base RAM with mouse driver and CD-ROM driver and sound card driver loaded, and actually
that CD-ROM driver was bad.
Yeah, that was CD. What was MSCDEX. Yes, and that was
Microsoft's compact disc extensions. I think is what it meant.
Ooh, nice one. So anyway, that's me. The game actually sucks. I only played it for 15 minutes and realized that, one, I'm shit at Flashback in the first place. I can never get out of the first couple of levels. When I hit the city, it's all over for me. I can't get anywhere in it. And two, the CD-ROM drive is awful. The CD-ROM version, I should say. The CD-ROM drive was quite awful as well, but the version is awful because they replaced all the fancy vector animations with these terrible rendered cutscenes and awful voice acting.
Right, because, hey, we have a CD, so let's do...
Yeah, actually, I wrote an unremittingly bad, negative review of Flashback and Moby games back when I was 16 or something.
Right.
And I actually got what is, for the relatively nice and pleasant internet of the late 90s, what is tantamount to an email death threat about someone basically.
Really?
Yeah, he was really, really appalled at everything I had to say on the game, and basically called me an idiot for thinking that, and that I should retry the game. And I haven't, so I have no idea.
So there.
I got the same shit at me for reviewing negatively Phantasmagoria, the first game.
But that game sucks.
Yeah, it does. But and even on an IMDb page, on Phantasmagoria's IMDb page, I wrote a very negative review of Phantasmagoria. And the dude who has the largest Phantasmagoria fan site actually got in touch with me to tell me what a fucking idiot I was. Although in a pleasant tone, but in a really, I really don't agree. Well, of course you don't. You have the biggest fucking fan site devoted to this game ever. So I think the title of it was "Click Here to Be Spooked."
No swear today, trolls.
We're all adults, but I mean, think about it, trolls. If it was back in the day, and it was the height of SpaceQuest.net and all that stuff, and some guy showed up and said SpaceQuest sucks, and blah, 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 I mean, you'd probably get a little bit defensive.
Well, we got those guys all the time. SpaceQuest had the biggest online community of the 90s. I
True.
think. we were pretty.
I mean, I was in it, so.
Yeah. So we got haters all the time. Hey, why do you waste your time on this stupid adventure game? And we was like, there's more of us than there is of you. So
whatever.
go away.
Exactly. And getting back to the memory
Yeah,
stuff.
that wasn't really on topic.
No, whatever. Like, we don't need to be. These things are never on topic. But I think we've all had some kind of stories like that. And for me, I think I've told this story a lot of times. For me, it was always Aces of the Pacific. That one needed. I can't remember. It was either like 590 something, or it was a hair over 600K. Anything where you had to get like over 600K of base memory available, conventional memory, that was a challenge. Yeah. Now, luckily, that was I don't think that ever came out on CD, or if it did, it was in like a collection or something. But so you had the big savings of not needing to load up that CD driver.
Mm-hmm.
But I
actually.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just thinking, now that I think about it, Flashback doesn't use a mouse driver. Why would I load the mouse driver in? Maybe I saved a couple of K just by not loading the mouse driver. That might have been what pushed me over the 600. But Flashback CD was awful. It needed like 611, and you've got 640 at total. So 611 is a lot.
Yeah, and I think like that mouse driver was like 18K or 20K or something. It was this massive chunk of memory that needed to be used up, right?
So I might have misspoke. I might have not actually loaded the mouse driver because I'm not that much of an idiot.
But I remember finding, because I guess there wasn't. It's not like it is today, right? But now you just plug in a mouse and it works. And there obviously is a mouse driver somewhere in Windows, like mouse.sys or some crap. But before. There wasn't just one mouse driver. There was a variety of mouse drivers you could have, right? And so we found, I think, like a 1K mouse driver.
Nice.
And we started just sending it around, saying, "Okay, guys, use this damn mouse driver because you don't need like a 20K mouse driver." So we had like a 1 or 2K mouse driver that we jam into high memory if we had to, and that really helped, because I think like for games like Ace of the Pacific and whatever, like we had joysticks. So you didn't need a mouse, but it was convenient for the UI, because you could go through with your keyboard and all that. But it was better to have a mouse than to not have one. So it was nice. And did anyone ever get into sort of like obviously we all made boot disks and things like that, but getting into like those menu options on boot, the auto exec options?
That's a perfect setup for the one out of the two stories that I actually have.
Okay.
So those menus that you're talking about is basically a feature they added back in MS-DOS 6.0. So it's relatively new in MS-DOS terms. Must have been 93 or I don't know when.
That wasn't in 5.0?
No, I actually checked because I'm like that. Anyway. So yeah, around the same time DOS 6 came out, I was getting really frustrated with having to constantly kind of adjust my auto exec and config sys, because you can get to a pretty stable configuration that works for the vast majority of things, but not for everything. There's always that one game or one demo or one older game especially that you want to run that will clash with whatever, EMM, QEMM, or that requires high mem but not like a memory manager, or
an XMS but not EMS,
or
whatever.
Requires those extra few Ks that you have to shave off by like omitting the mouse driver, that sort of thing. So I was getting really frustrated with that, and I was really heavily into programming way back when. So at that point, I don't even remember how I discovered the software interrupt 19 hex that you can call, and it warm boots the PC. So it's basically a software command that restarts your PC, but it doesn't go through all the kind of diagnostic process, like counting memory and all of that stuff. So it was pretty quick. And I cobbled together this really strange menu system that allows you to boot up like different auto exec and config sys files. But because I didn't have the know-how, it was sort of a weird hack that used like a single floppy disk, and then would modify the files on the hard drive and boot to that. It was a pretty weird kind of setup, but functionally, and even in terms of how it looked, it actually was very, very similar to what Microsoft ended up putting in DOS 6. and which actually came out like a few very short months later. And I had this image running around my head since I was about 11 of like Bill Gates breaking out of my house in the middle of the night with like a small black sack or a flag.
I've got the code. I've got the code.
Like cackling madly as he's running down the streets, like. That's weird. A lot.
A lot of people now aren't going to understand even what we're talking about because drivers take up such a little amount of our current computer's resources that this concept of which driver uses the least amount of memory, that's just completely gone. Now DOS gaming is over. I had config.sys and autoexec.bat in my C drive for just standard stuff, the best performance just to boot and all that. But then you had to have the special tweaks. I remember Seventh Guest. That was the first one. Was really hard because you needed the CD-ROM driver, the mouse driver, the sound driver, high mem and all that other stuff. You had to completely maximize all of your memory usage, no matter how much memory you had, because you still had to maximize that base. Like you talked about, we had sometimes out of your 640K of your base RAM, the game wanted 600 of that. So you had to have only 40K in your base memory. So you had to get all the high mem and UMB stuff running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I always had that with not just like the base memory stuff, but like I remember running Wing Commander 1 of my friend. He was the one that had the game originally, and the first place I saw it was on his computer at his house, and he had this super fancy new multimedia 386, which had, I've talked about it before, it had that CD-ROM with the cartridge that you put the CD in the cartridge, and then you loaded the cartridge into the CD-ROM drive. And his machine had however much RAM, maybe it was like, I don't know, 4 megs of RAM or 2 megs of RAM or something like that, but he had enough RAM so he could have EMS and XMS memory. So it must have been like 4 megs of RAM. And so when we played Wing Commander at his house, the guy, you saw the little stick guy hand move, and the cockpit would take damage and stuff like that. But on my 286, I either didn't have enough juice for it, or I just didn't have it set up so I could use EMS and XMS. So for me, Wing Commander was very boring. I mean, I loved it, but it was boring in that I just saw the guy's legs, no hand, and in a way the game was easier. Because if you took damage without EMS, or I think it was EMS specifically, without EMS, your cockpit wouldn't take internal damage. So if you took enough damage, like your radar screen would crack and your, things would break. So the game would actually become harder. But without that extra memory, you didn't get those features. So the game was easier.
I remember games used to, like in the old days, they would look for how much memory you had, how much high memory you had, and it would go like taking advantage of external memory, and you get like additional features. And I remember it wasn't Wing Commander. I think am I sounding robotic?
Yeah, you're robot-y a little. Every now and then you robot a bit.
Ah, damn it! I even pulled out the cable, so it's actually I'm a wired person right now. Maybe that's very much right now. In fact, I'll just shut up. I'll hand over the rights to someone else.
Danish internet is always that's kind of always the problem with the BS Designers podcast as well, and it's always you. You always break down.
I've moved recently, and I really don't know why I am so plagued with this, because the internet in Denmark is not supposed to be this shitty. I don't know what it is.
Ironically, it's kind of on topic. Is all the work we had to do back then to get computers working and all that.
It's a feat of strength for trolls to be on the show. Maybe just unplug or are you using like the onboard mic on the laptop or?
Oh no. I am. See, I had a lot of problems even getting into the Hangout. I spent 15 minutes trying to convince Hangouts that I actually did have a webcam, and it would make me very happy if it would use it, please. See, and this is my gaming rig setup. So I got an external mic and an external sound card and everything, and it's supposed to look smashing. It really is not, apparently.
You look beautiful.
Yes,
you just sound like a robot.
You see every blemish in my ungodly face.
Anyways, we'll roll with it and we'll see, or maybe try dropping and logging back in. Maybe that'll help. Or actually, talk now that you turned off your video. Maybe it's a bandwidth issue.
I am bandwidth issue. Please.
Nope, still crusty.
No, not a bandwidth.
It does sound like a bandwidth. Like, for me, it'd be when all the kids are trying to stream Netflix or something while I'm trying to broadcast. That was before I got Google Fiber, though. So,
right. It's funny. It actually leads me into a story. Not so much a feat of strength, but for some reason, a lot of my stories revolve around Wing Commander games. Maybe because, they were sort of pushing the envelope a little bit. But Wing Commander 3, I believe that I was playing on my 486 DX266 or whatever, which was probably a little bit, a little crappy.
Sounds a little bit weak for that. Like, it's a modern game by those standards. It's like,
yeah, exactly. So the thing would be I could play the games. I remember you could switch it between VGA and SVGA, and the problem being I really wanted to play the game in SVGA because why wouldn't you? And and so I had two options. I could either play the game in VGA and actually be able to play the game but have it look fuzzy and crappy, at least in my opinion. But the other option potentially was to switch it into SVGA, and it was jerkier, but it looked really nice. But my sound card, actually no, you know what? It was a Pentium 200 I was playing it on, and for some reason, and so it should have ran fine. But for some reason, when I switched it to SVGA, my sound card would start freaking out. Like it would work, but it would basically do what Trolls sounds like. It would be like it would get all robot-y. Yeah, it would start to stutter, and I'm like, it must have been because again, a Pentium 200 for Wing Commander 3 Pro was probably okay, but there must have been like an interrupt problem, and like it was this weird this neck Pentium 200 that had this onboard kind of pseudo onboard sound, and it had like a cool like integrated front panel where you could adjust the volume, and there was an amp in it, so you could just plug unpowered speakers into it, and all this stuff. But for some reason, again, maybe because it was this weird setup, that whenever I'd switch to SVGA, everything would just go robot-y. So I could play a pretty game that was really jerky and had crunchy sound, or I could play a game in VGA that actually was playable.
That actually leads to a question I wanted to ask you all, because I always fell on the side of that, in my younger days, where I wanted the crispest visuals possible. So I, for example, ran GL Quake on an S3 Verge, which was I don't really think it was a 3D graphics card, but
no, it was considered a 3D decelerator, not accelerator.
Okay, but you know what I'm talking about. So I would sometimes get as low as 3 frames per second on GL Quake, but man, it looked gorgeous. Now, I normally didn't play with that low, but I would play FPSs with as low as 15 frames per second and not really worry about it, so that I had a super crisp, just the absolute best, visuals that are possible. But then, my buddy was the opposite. He would run, the best frame rate he possibly could, and that's what he would go for. So, he'd play even in later games without textures to have a better frame rate. It just looked awful, but it was smooth.
But it ran like butter.
Which side did you guys all fall on that? Go for FPS?
Some games, including shooters, you can sort of get by with a lower frame rate. So Unreal Tournament, for instance, really breaks. Well, at least 2003 version did. Below like 20 frames per second, it's just unplayable. Then you had System Shock, for instance, the original one, which was a lot kind of more slow-paced. So
it wasn't really a Twitch sort of game. It was an FPS, but not really.
Yeah. You could play better on that game if you had better visuals, so you could actually see everything. You know what you're looking at.
Yes, I'd agree. It just didn't need the frame rate as such. Like, it always helps. It always improves the experience, but it's not mandatory. Also, following up on The Verge and also ATI Rage 2 and a couple other cards, I benchmarked a bunch of these back in the early Direct 3D games, and it was hysterical because with like Direct 3D software emulation, I would get 2 frames per second on like Final Reality or something, but with ATI Rage 2, I would get 2 seconds per frame. So wow. A 3D accelerator, it was a piece of crap. And the S3 Verge, if I remember correctly, had really good 2D performance, though.
Oh, yeah. It's great for 2D. And non-accelerated 3D games. I mean, what was it? Duke Nukem 3D. That card was smoking on that. At least.
Yeah, that same machine. Yeah, on that same machine where I was playing Wing Commander 3, and Tomer, you went away for a sec. It was actually a Pentium 200. I'm sorry, I was wrong.
Yeah, I was listening. I just had to sort something out.
Yeah, and the that one came with with an ATI 3D Rage Pro or something like that. And yeah, that was, I don't know why they put the word 3D in there, because it didn't really do a whole lot.
I remember when I used to go to LANs and we would play Quake 2 mostly, because that had just come out and that was the thing. I had just gotten my first Pentium, I think it was, and it had this weird, because this was back in the days when 3D effects and all these other companies were kind of competing over the 3D accelerator market, and I had fallen on the non-voodoo side, not by choice, but by ignorance. So I got this Direct 3D card. And it would 3D accelerate, but it would also crash at random intervals. Just absolutely crash, which is awful when you're playing a deathmatch. So I would usually run in software mode, also because I could crank it down to 320 by 200, and the 3D acceleration had to run in 640 by 480 at least, and it wasn't quite. My Pentium wasn't quite fast enough to run Quake 2, at least not in a competitive sense. In SVGA, so I would crank it down to 320 by 200 VGA software mode and just plow away. That is awesome. Also, there is apparently a bandwidth adjustment slider in Hangouts that I just found a couple of minutes ago. So that probably is why my voice sounds better. Although, of course, the awful blemishes in my face you'll have to imagine now, because I think video quality just dropped a bit. No, they're still there.
No, you look fine.
Yeah.
Your blemishes look as blemishy as ever.
Oh God, man! I am tempted to make some Michael Jackson jokes here, but that would be very inappropriate. It's actually just, I have a cream I'm supposed to, but I hate putting cream on my face because I always get Mr. Mackey from South Park going topical cream, and I just go ugh. So,
and now we know more about trolls than we needed to.
yes.
Got me thinking of texture filters that could smooth that out.
Yeah, there you go.
That's another thing that people, when in that first popped up, was the idea of texture filters, where instead of having, giant pixels when you walk up to a textured wall, you could filter that out and your, frame rate would drop. And I preferred it filtered, but it was kind of fuzzy. But other people were like, no, that's fuzzy, and that just looks like somebody put Vaseline over your screen. I mean,
I like the way Serious Sam did it. Like when you went straight up to a wall, it would actually have like a second texture it would put over it.
Yeah.
So it didn't look like blown up and pixely and all gradient and shit. They just had,
Serious Sam was actually really, really good with level of detail management. So they managed these crazy outdoor scenes, but you could walk up to anything, and the level of detail algorithms they use just fantastic. Also, I think it might have been the first game to support, and I have no idea how you're actually supposed to pronounce this word, anisotropic filtering.
I think that's about right, or anisotropic, yeah. We know what words you're saying.
It's for non-isotropic, so anisotropic. I don't know. I'm not a native speaker. I don't care. So
hashtag second language.
It was really, really, really impressive for the time. If you could, if you had a powerful enough video card, the textures were crazy detailed on that game.
And there's some interesting stories. I think actually we should give an honorary Feats of Strength mention to the Crow Team guys who put out Serious Sam the demo so that they could scrounge up enough interest to go buy computers to actually test the full game on, because apparently they'd all been like sharing one or two really crappy computers. They didn't have money to buy actual computers to work on the game with. So that's a feat of strength.
It was like the original Kickstarter.
Yeah.
It was very early in Croatian independence, and like the whole region there was not doing well in the 90s. So that is actually really, really impressive.
Yeah, so honorary mention to Crow Team, who actually put together a game without having machines to run it on. That is fantastic.
that is very impressive. How about you, Craig? You haven't talked all that much yet. I'm sure you've got some interesting stories.
Not really.
Oh well.
We're so glad you joined us.
I suffered through the same stuff that you guys were talking about earlier with, high memsys and using EMM386 or QEMM and all that stuff. I think, my biggest feat of strength was probably getting 610, K free to run. It's probably Ultima 8.
Right.
Not 7, 8. The Super Mario Ultima Brothers. So yeah, I don't know. That's probably it for me.
And it's funny because like I had a feeling that we'd mostly be talking about trying to get memory working, because that was sort of like always, unless a game would just full out crash when you installed it, usually the reason it wouldn't work had to do with memory, like not having enough conventional memory, or not having enough EMS or XMS.
Not always.
No, I mean sometimes it would be other things, but I found sometimes with other issues it would be because, or like an aspect of the game wouldn't work, like the sound wouldn't work or the video would look funny or whatever. But if a game wouldn't just wouldn't start, it was generally memory stuff.
There's two kind of very common other reasons. One which you can't do much about, which is bad RAM, and that manifests in any number of ways, but most commonly like EMM 386 or QEMM crashes. And there's just not much to do. You'll have it tested and replace the bad RAM. Another kind of weird thing that can happen if you don't really know what the hell you're doing is IRQ conflicts.
Yes.
So,
yeah. Oh man.
I'm surprised Craig didn't mention that, because I'd have thought that would be right up your alley.
Because the sound cards all wanted to be IRQ7, which is your printer port.
Yes.
So eventually.
Why?
Well, yeah, I don't know, but eventually Creative at that time figured it out and started making everything default IRQ5 after.
And at that point, it didn't matter, because plug and play was already kind of a thing with the A32 and not, and even the 16 I think had a PNP version.
Yeah, but it was poorly implemented.
Well, my theory as to why they used IRQ7 is because nobody at Creative Labs had a printer port. That's the only reason.
I think the typical thing back then was all sound card companies figured you weren't doing anything printing / digital audio simultaneously.
And that's just insane, because the printer port is used for so many different things. So you might have everything from Covox to a printer to a zip drive or something that you might actually be connecting or backing stuff up to or loading a game off of. And
anything that had a parallel port on it.
You want to talk about Feats. You're talking about printer ports. I have some games, arcade games, on the route that still make money, that have their I/O boards connected through the parallel port. So when the motherboard dies, I have to find a motherboard that has a printer port.
Again, how hard is that today?
Thank goodness for eBay.
I was going to say, like, you can't go to a modern store, like you can't order one off of Newegg or something, right?
And that old stuff, old processors, old motherboards, people know that there's a reason why I'm looking for it, so they know they can charge me an arm and a leg for it.
Right.
Can't you use like one of them USB printer port adapters, or like there's a whole bunch of these. You can get these on eBay, on AliExpress, that sort of thing.
It doesn't work for me because of the fact that a lot of these games have proprietary software. They don't, run on DOS or Windows. Some of them run on Linux, but it's one of them I did try to get into Linux and make that work, but they kind of close off their software. They don't want techs screwing with it because they're afraid of piracy mainly, and they feel if they lock you down to hardware, that makes it that much harder to pirate it. So sometimes I have to even get the exact right motherboards on some older games. But yeah, adding a USB to parallel just never works. Even on a few of my games that do run on Windows, they have Windows embedded and it's all locked down where I can't even go and do the drivers or anything. So it sucks.
Man.
Yeah, parallel ports.
That's crazy. But yeah, and so, kind of further along that line, one of mine, it's not so much a feat of strength as more like I learned, because I found, back like today, if you're having a problem, like say, whatever, even if it's not a game, like say, I don't know, your printer doesn't work, or you're having some like weird, like a blue screen or something like that, you go onto Google, you type in the error message, and 99.9999999% of the time, 1,000 other people have had the same problem as you. You find the solution, you implement it. Maybe the first solution doesn't work, but the second or third one does. Like there's ways to find things out. And back in the day, like there wasn't. You didn't know how a lot of this stuff worked unless you had a friend who maybe had another friend who learned it from his uncle, who whatever. And
I think this might have actually been my feat of strength because I had no idea what an IRQ was, no idea what HiMem actually was or how it worked. I just knew that if I did such and such, because I'd seen other people do it, then that would free up so-and-so memory, or that would make so-and-so run. That would make the audio work in this game, even though it didn't work in this game and such. I had no idea what it actually did, technically. And I really still don't. It wasn't until a couple of weeks ago that I watched a YouTube video on what DOS4GW actually does. I didn't know that. I just knew that if DOS4GW showed up, that meant the game was using high memory for something.
Right. So it was able to jump into protected mode, so it could
protected mode.
Yeah, it could access beyond the 640K of base memory, which would be considered real mode.
Well, and I was always several years behind on the hardware generation because my family was middle class, but still we didn't get hardware when it was new. So I remember games not running with that. Which CPU generation allowed protected mode? I'm pretty sure, was it 286?
Well, do you want the short answer or the long answer?
How about the medium-sized answer?
The medium-sized answer is protected mode, as you refer to it, is the 386, but
386, okay.
And a protected mode was introduced with the 286.
Right,
and
yes, I remember that.
Can't help but inundate you with technical details. What we were actually talking about with DOS4GW is putting the system back from what is called virtual 86 mode, which is an offshoot of protected mode, back into protected mode. It's a bit fiddly, technically.
I watched the YouTube video and then went, I still don't really know what this means. I mean, I understood it in the moment that the YouTube dude explained it to me. And then it was like 45 minutes later, I was watching Star Trek going, that didn't make any sense to me at all.
Not enough technobabble.
So I don't know
the power couplings with the dilithium thingamajiggy.
My roots are in the demo scene, so those sort of things were bread and butter back in the early 90s, mid 90s ish, until Windows basically took over and none of that was relevant anymore.
Well, I mean, Charles, I ran into the problem, and you sort of recently ran into the problem with the final Unity, right? With the Sound Blaster 16 driver implementation on that specific game was sort of janky, and it looked like, for you it worked initially, and then it stopped working, and for me it never worked, so we had to go back to use the original, the SB 8-bit driver to make it.
And it's weird because that game conflicts somehow with your sound card, but it also conflicts somehow with memory use. I remember the game ran fine with Sound Blaster 16 unless I got into space combat, and then for some reason, once it starts using the floating point processor, things just went absolutely apeshit.
Oh, so now you're talking about floating point processors. That was my next, hardware developed so fast that, it felt like just a year or two after I finally got something to do the protector mode, stuff like that. Then I was getting games that were complaining that I didn't have a floating point processor. I'm like, well, what the crap is that now? Now what do I need? Turns out I needed a Pentium, right? I mean, wasn't it? Yeah, Pentium was the first processor that did floating point. Right?
Well, so it's floating. I guess not necessarily, because isn't floating point just the math coprocessor?
Yeah, that's what I was told. And Star Trek: Final Unity uses the math coprocessing for one thing, and it's the worst part of the game. It's the space combat thing.
Now, there was some games that I can't remember. There were some games I had that said that this game requires a floating point processor, and I had a 486, and once I got to a Pentium, I was finally able to run it. So maybe that's the point. They needed it in the processor itself, not as a coprocessor.
Oh, that's certainly possible too. But it might also have been because once you got to a Pentium, there was no such thing as a Pentium DX2 or whatever. It was just a Pentium had a floating point. It had there was nothing limiting it from doing faster floating point. It's not that the other processors couldn't do floating point. It was just they were a lot slower to do it, if I'm not wrong.
No, they couldn't.
Oh, they actually just literally couldn't.
Yeah, up until the 486 DX, that was like the first chip that actually had an onboard floating point unit. So what you had before, before that, or if you didn't have a math coprocessor, what you had you would use emulation libraries that would basically do the same thing with software, and it was way slower. But the CPU.
Okay, so that's what I mean, because obviously I felt like the computer had to be able to do floating point math, but it just wasn't the processor doing the math.
No, a computer can do anything fundamentally.
Tell it to do.
Question.
Yeah.
And again, it's a case of technology that I know what it does in the end, but I don't know how it works. And to me, the name floating point processor just brings to mind this image of a circuit board in like a life raft floating around inside the cabinet. And I'm like, oh, why would you need to do that? Oh, it's a math coprocessor. Oh, so it's bad at math. Oh, I get it.
Oh, you Luddite, you.
Yes, exactly. I'm an idiot historian.
So this conversation has made me think of a hardware feat I had to kind of go through that.
Good, those are the funnest ones.
So,
yes, we're back on
so when I first upgraded to 486, I intentionally bought a motherboard. I wanted to, work with my current hardware. I really never just bought a whole new computer. I've always, even my current computer is still technically an upgrade of my original 8086, where I just kept upgrading parts and parts, and that's all. That's
just this perpetual upgrade process.
Correct. So when I got the money to get a 46 motherboard, there were a few. Maybe there's only one. I found one motherboard that had the AT power connector and the ATX power connector, because around that same time everything was switching to ATX, and I didn't have the money to buy a power supply and case and this motherboard and the RAM and the CPU, because you had to get new RAM too. So I got the three: the RAM, the CPU, motherboard. And go to install it, and my AT power supply works, but my case is still AT, and it didn't have pop-out panels back then. And this new motherboard had the ATX, and I didn't know what to do, and it was kind of in the evening. It was too late, to even go out and get another case, even if I had the money, and I wanted to game. You buy this new hardware, you got to use it right then and there.
Right away.
So that's when I first did what I've done many times since then, is set it up on the box that the CPU or the motherboard came in. So I didn't even take the power supply out of my case. I just put it right next to it. Had the wires coming out of the case onto the motherboard, and then the motherboard just Frankenstein with all these wires back to the case where the CD-ROM was.
I had a cardboard box is an insulator, right?
Yeah, it worked. The thing booted up. It worked. I was playing games.
My dad did the same thing. He has this little office. He's an electrical engineer, so I think I've said that before. But he had this little office, and one day when I was living at home, I went in, and he had this big plank of wood sitting on his desk with all these components strewn around, like connected to and fro, and some of them looked like computer parts, some of them looked like things had just fallen off the shelf and just rearranged randomly. And in the middle of all of this mess was a giant fuck-off red switch. And he said, and he just sort of came in and went, oh, hey, watch this. And he pulled the giant fuck-off red switch, and this tiny little computer monitor over on the side that I hadn't even noticed turned on. And Windows started booting. And I was like, what the fuck is happening? This is your new server, son.
Oh.
The things we had to go through. Like, I couldn't play Seventh Guest until I had my 46. I got the CD-ROM and played Myst, but then you're so happy to have your new CD-ROM, and you pop in Seventh Guest, and it freaking says you need a 46. It's like, more freaking money. And I worked at McDonald's as a kid. I couldn't afford to go out and buy a new motherboard CPU as soon as I got my, I think it was like $300, my Sound Blaster and CD-ROM or something. And, it took a couple paychecks to be able to afford that. And now the freaking game that comes with it says I need to buy a new motherboard and CPU.
Yeah.
The 7th Guest didn't need a 486. Like, I ran it on a 386 back in the day. So that's weird.
I could have swore I got a message that straight up said that I need a 46 or better. Maybe I'm remembering wrong, but I thought that was 7th Guest, because I remember coming with my CD-ROM. Say what?
They probably need a 46 running in SVGA.
Okay.
That took some. Actually, here's a question. This is not technically a feat of strength. This is pretty much the opposite. When you guys, got games, back in the day, I used to love, tinkering with the settings and such. And even though I could run, like the 7th Guest in SVGA, I would try and run it in, VGA 325-200 just to see what would happen. And for instance, if you tried running Space Quest 5 in, I'm not making any sense, am I?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's hard.
Quest 5 didn't have SVGA, so no, you're not making any sense.
Like for me, it was more a question of later on with 3D stuff when you could choose your screen resolution and all of that. Like that's when I would really start messing around to really try and find that balance, between like we were talking about before, between frames and how good things look. And it was always like, well, how? Because now it's even a little bit different because you can still technically do that, but given that we have these LCD screens that had running, if you don't choose like the right, if you don't choose native resolution of the screen, then it doesn't look right. It's fuzzy and blah, blah, blah. Whereas on the CRTs, you could basically do whatever you wanted. Like they could display like a million different, different modes.
Did anybody play MDK?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the only game that I can think of that relates to what you're saying, Trolls, to me, is where I went back to software rendering because that game was written for its software render, and the software render was so good.
It was amazing.
But then later,
it was beyond good. It was light years ahead of everything else.
So of course I always just screw software render. I went straight to the hardware. I was a huge believer in hardware rendering, and I got like the first Voodoo as soon as I could, and it just because again I love that visual fidelity. But yeah, MDK, like somebody kept bugging me like, dude, you got to go back to software. Trust me, it looks way better. And I didn't believe him. Like, fine, you know what? Let's do it. So we switched to the software render, and holy crap, he was right. That was an amazing software render.
I used to play Carmageddon in software because I didn't have a 3D effects card, and that game would only run in accelerated mode with the 3D effects card, and I had my direct 3D card, so I couldn't. And then one time I went to a LAN and I saw someone play Carmageddon in 3D accelerated mode, and I just thought to myself, this looks awful. It looks too sort of shiny, and it's not gritty enough. It's not, because that game is, above all else, gritty as hell, and it just looked too shiny and clean cut, and I just didn't like it. So to this day, if I play classic Carmageddon, like the version off Steam, I will turn off hardware acceleration. I want the grainy old 320 by 200, and just turn the sound up really loud so I can hear all the blood and guts splashing across the windshield. That just feels right to me.
Mm-hmm.
Some newer versions of older games, like Doom, for example, I played on the Xbox 360, and they didn't actually use any new hardware tricks on that port. The only difference is they allowed higher resolutions. So the original software engine runs on the 360 at up to 1080p, and wow, that is gorgeous having the software rendering at 1080p. And before I had it on that, I would play it on PC with what did you call it? Not wrappers, but the programs that you'd run to run a game in GL, old games.
Yeah, I mean they were effectively wrappers, weren't they?
I can't remember. There's a term for them. We actually discussed it in a previous. But I love it. Once I found those programs, I'd run all my favorite old 3D games in that mode. But you're definitely right, Trolls, that they didn't have quite the same feel when they were running 3D rendered. But again, at the time I was just so stuck on everything looking as beautiful as possible that really it wasn't until that 360 port of Doom that I started really, respecting higher res versus actual 3D rendering.
Because these days, there's so much detail in like a 3D game world. I wouldn't imagine anyone trying to play like modern Doom in 320 by 200. You couldn't tell what the fuck was going on screen.
Right. Yeah.
But how did we ever know what was going on the screen? I mean, I played that game all the way through in DOS, and then I play again now, and
you're like, oh.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, no, there's 2 pixels moving. How do I know what's going? Well, back then you didn't have to know what it was. You just shot at it,
Right, exactly. And like a lot of older, like the last episode was on, what's it called, F-19 Stealth Fighter, and like a lot of flights, like I was talking about Aces of the Pacific before, like you'd see an enemy plane, and if that enemy plane wasn't like within, like in super close, like in dogfighting range, you were basically chasing a pixel, then you were chasing 2 pixels, then maybe you were chasing 4 pixels, and then eventually it would turn into a little cross. And then as you got closer, it would develop into like a thing that looked like a plane. But originally, it's like, well, there's a dot, I better fly toward it.
In these modern games, we have to tell what, you have to look at it before you shoot at it, but we couldn't do those back in 320 by 200.
No, I mean, everything had to be pretty, actually, it was interesting. I was listening to the latest Blue Cup Tools podcast that just came out this morning, and Ben, I mean, Ben Chandler lately, all the stuff he's been putting out, like all his writing and his articles and his analysis,
they're amazing.
They're so amazing. And he was talking about, and a lot of the work that they do for Wadgetai is, low 320 by 200 or 640 by 480. And, he was sort of they're talking about highlighting things in adventure games, like, using highlighting and directing people toward, important things in a scene without, putting big flashing arrows at it saying, this is what you need to click on. And, he was talking a lot about, scenes where, if he knows ahead of time that it's a scene where you're going to be spending, or a room or whatever, that you're going to be spending a lot of time in. Say you get stuck in that room and, there's a puzzle to get out and it's going to take some time. In a room like that, he'll put in a lot more detail because you're going to be there for a long time. There's more things to click on. Whereas if it's just kind of a passing through one thing to do sort of room, he'll put in a lot less detail, but you really had to, in that sort of lower res environment, you had to really focus on, how much detail you're putting in a thing. And if you put in too much, you're going to get lost. And if you put in not enough, then it's too easy and boring. And so I found this very interesting balancing act about.
I actually don't know if it's subconscious, but when I would play older games, I would recognize that, and I would know. I loved exploring every nook and cranny of the game that had an ability to explore. I never liked what I called just the corridors or just walking straight. Those games were boring. Mm-hmm. But games where you could explore in any way, shape, or form. But if there was like just a bland area, I knew, well, this is just a place for me to run through. And that's really screwing with me right now. The current game I'm playing is the Zelda Breath of the Wild. And those developers made every single inch of that game super detailed, where I keep seeing this really detailed, like, outgrove or something, and I'm like, oh, there's got to be something here, and I spend half an hour and there's nothing. It's just beautiful. So
right, that because to us, like, a brick, there's a brick that's a slightly different color, that's got to be something, we got to go check that out, right? Whereas in this game, every brick is a different color. Like,
and my kids don't understand. I was trying to explain exactly what you're saying. Is back in the day, if a developer took the time to make this detailed, there was something there for you, and you just had to look around for it.
I don't know if this is entirely on topic, but I just got done playing Full Throttle Remastered, and it upscales the old 320 by 200 graphics to whatever full screen widescreen resolution you've got. And I think there is a game that does not benefit from a high-res version at all. That you can clearly tell, even though they've tried polishing up the graphics and such, these are graphics that were made for the 320 by 200 resolution, because in their very first VGA game, Monkey Island 2, they put in way too much detail. So everything was, it was a detailed game for sure, but there was so much grain because when they scanned in the backgrounds, they were, there was too much going on. Simon the Sorcerer 2 has the same problem, where everything just looks ultra blurry and grainy and weird and such. So they gradually stopped putting in so much detail. You've got Day of the Tentacle, which is in this cartoony, flat style. And then you've got Full Throttle, #second language, which is just all about shadow and, again, very flat colors and all this stuff. And when you see that on an HD monitor in like a 1080p resolution, it just looks unfinished somehow.
Right.
So that's a game I would dearly recommend you run in original graphics mode, but with the sound. Obviously, they made the sound a lot better, but the graphics, not a fan.
I keep having thoughts back to our remakes and remasters and stuff, and that's why a lot of those games instead of getting remasters, they got kind of a remake. I'm thinking of Monkey Island, for example, and we recently had the Grim Fandango, and so a lot of those adventure games are getting where it's not the original art. They've redone the art because the original art doesn't HD scale very well, or takes away from it. I shouldn't say it doesn't HD scale well, it just doesn't do the original art justice. And a lot of those games, though, they do let you switch back and forth between original art and classic art, so that's awesome.
Yeah, and you get the then you have to live with the 4:3 aspect ratio, of course. But that's a small price to pay. On the subject, I know this is derailing completely, but has anyone seen
that's what we do.
Yeah, has anyone seen the Poison Pawn, the Tex Murphy fan game that's turning into a real episode of the game?
I just found out about it a couple weeks ago. So
it is. It started out as a retelling of Tex Murphy Overseer, the least regarded in the series for some reason, even though it has some of the strongest acting in any FMV game.
Which is a retelling of like Mean Streets or
Which
something.
is a retelling of Mean Streets, and they're using the latest Unity engine, and it just looks so gorgeous. I'm so glad I got a computer that can finally run it, because damn. Yeah. So. That's a game. If you're going to upscale or rescale anything from the olden days, you might want to actually look into redrawing the graphics, because some games were made with that resolution in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I wish Martin was here, because there's a console game that defies that. Wind Waker, Zelda Wind Waker on GameCube. It used cell shading art, and that game was one of the big pushes for emulation of GameCube games, because the emulation could do everything into full HD and stuff, and that was the one just poster child of how good upscaling some games could look.
Right, and I guess it really does have a lot to do with the art style, right?
Exactly.
So something that's cell shaded is for a prime candidate to be upscaled like that, because, and that's why I'd say, like, it's surprising that you say that Full Throttle doesn't look as good as it could, upscale, because to me it's sort of like it and Day of the Tentacle. Like Day of the Tentacle remastered, I thought looked incredible.
Looked fantastic, because they didn't need to do anything to it. It's supposed to look cartoony.
Right, and I kind of like, to me, like, I haven't played Full Throttle remastered yet, though I think I have a key for it. I just haven't gotten around to it. And to me, like, Full Throttle is also somewhat cartoony, though I guess there's a lot more 3D rendered kind of aspects to it.
Yeah. There's that, but the art style clearly is made with, like, if I'm trying to put this in art terms, even though I'm not an artist, I'm not Francisco Gonzalez, but like very broad strokes, not very detailed, like just very. It's all about the shadow and the big splotches of color and such. And when you downscale those 320 by 200, they look amazing. But when you upscale them, it kind of looks like an unfinished painting, at least.
Okay, yeah, no, I see what you're saying now. Yeah, well, that's interesting.
So Feats of Strength,
okay, so
anyone?
Yeah, no, getting back. So I had one that getting back to hardware and IRQs. So I started talking about this, and then we got off on the side of how you weren't able to really easily learn things unless you knew a guy who knew a guy or whatever. So I didn't know. So I had a lot of trouble on one of my machines, and it was probably my 386, because this had to do with a modem. I had a 2400 baud modem, that we would use to jump on BBSs and play Solar Realms and Barren Realms and Legend of the Red Dragon and all those awesome door games, and download message packets from FidoNet and all this stuff. And there was some, I don't know how or why, but it was like this. I had this weird unresolvable IRQ issue with this modem. And the only way to get it working was to boot the machine and hit Shift F1, which I believe would just bypass everything. Like, it just wouldn't load anything.
Mm-hmm.
And
like DOS safe mode.
Effectively, like, I don't know, Tom or Craig, am I right about that? I remember Shift F1. I just don't remember if it just loaded nothing.
I honestly am not sure.
Right. So anyways, I had to hit Shift F1, and whatever Shift F1 did, it made the modem work, but it also meant that nothing else on the machine, like none of the other peripherals were active. And to do this, like even today, if you're booting your machine into Windows or whatever, and you want to get to the boot menu, you don't know quite when to hit F8 or F4 or delete or whatever, or Shift F1.
Yeah.
So
they hide that fucking line behind this terrible graphic.
Right. And yeah, if you want to get into the BIOS or whatever. So this thing, so we would. So the problem with this was that because we couldn't get the modem working, and we were actually playing it was a sort of a mod for Barren Realms Elite called Solar Trek Realms. So it was basically Barren Realms, but in the Star Trek universe. So you had, instead of like space stations and whatever, you had like Klingons and Terrans and starships and blah blah blah. And I was playing it because these are like turn-based BBS door games. So you each had your empire, and you had defended and attacked and made money and blah, blah, blah. And the BBS only had one line. So what would happen is I was playing with my friends from early high school, So we would all race home after school, and whoever got home first would be the first person who would be able to log in that day and do all their stuff. And, if they wanted to attack us, they'd be able to attack us first before we attacked them. And so there was this big race to get home. And the problem was the computer was either off because people turned their computers off and on. Back in the day, trolls, I believe you still do that.
Yes, I do.
Mine are just on 24/7 now, but you'd have to boot the computer, and then you'd have to hit Shift F1, and if you missed, you have to go. You had to turn it off and try again. So we would sit there and just spam Shift F1 until the computer started beeping at us. And whatever. We didn't care, because if you missed it, you probably wouldn't be able to get the other guy that got home, and he would get on first, and then he'd do all his stuff. So that was sort of like, so for me, it was more a question of, I can't remember how we learned that Shift F1 would do this.
You know how I think you learned?
How's that?
Probably the same way I learned how to do all of this stuff with msconfig and AutoExec and stuff like that. PC Magazine. Any chance you read that?
It's certainly possible. It was either that or I was a big Computer Gaming World guy.
Oh, okay. Yeah. See, I used PC Magazine was available in the school library. For some reason they had.
Oh, cool.
Which, in the late 80s, early 90s was really weird. But they had it, and it had all sorts of good tips. It had articles about new hardware that could never afford and stuff, but in the back, it had always had some sort of DOS tips and stuff. And while you're talking, I looked it up, and there was different things like F8 would allow it to only do HiMem.sys. It would skip everything in your config.sys and AutoExec.bat, but HiMem. So it would be one to use for games that did need the HiMem loaded, but nothing else.
Right.
And it was like F8, F5, F1. There's a whole bunch of apparently different boot options you had, and they started that in apparently MS-DOS 6.0, according to this article I just looked up.
Okay, well that would make sense. Yes, DOS 6 was sort of like I remember there being a big deal about DOS 5, and then a bigger deal about DOS 6.
Well, I remember DOS 5. That's when games started requiring. Before that, it just MS-DOS.
Yeah,
and there was MS-DOS 2.2 or something. And everybody had 3 or something better, 4 or something. But once 5 came out, a lot of games required DOS 5.0.
Yeah, but you're talking like late 80s, early 90s. You got to remember PCs have been around for about 10 years at that point. So anything that wanted to run off a hard drive would typically require DOS 3.0 or later.
3.3, I think, was kind of the
3.3 was kind of the canonical version for a couple of years, but the requirement, I think, was basically around some support from DOS for hard drives. I'm not even sure of the details at this point.
I think something just clicked with me. The reason why I don't understand what things do, I just did them and learned them almost like machine memory, is because we didn't have computer-dedicated magazines in Denmark, at least not any that I was reading or could understand. I was born in 1980, and we got our first IBM PC when I was a child, and everything I learned how to do, either my dad or my friends taught me, and they didn't bother explaining why it worked the way it did. They just went,
like, if you do this, it does this, and why doesn't matter.
You just type this in, and after a while, you just start, on muscle memory, you go, okay, if I load in HiMem first, then that means that takes up more memory than if I load this driver in first, or for some reason it works. Don't ask me why. Magic, probably wizards, I don't know. It just works that way. Even the order of drivers you loaded in would sometimes affect how much memory the next driver would take up. And it made no goddamn sense. It's just like, that's the way it is.
I'm convinced.
Like, I always saw that. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
I was gonna say, I'm convinced some drivers took up more memory if more memory was available. That's why you had to load those last.
Right, and to me, like, I always saw that as sort of like they have puzzles like this, right? Like you have all these things that are certain sizes, and you have this set of buckets that you have to put them in. Find the way you can fit the most things into these two buckets that you could.
We all played the best puzzle game, and it's called DOS.
Yeah, exactly.
All my second conflict says best puzzle game. I used to make up stories like the drivers were mad at each other, and they sort of got weird because if I loaded this driver in first, and then the next driver would get insulted and just go, "Well, I'm just gonna take up more RAM, fucker."
So I've got a feat that this kind of reminded me of that I was saving kind of for last, because this is pure hardware craziness, and it's maybe the craziest story you guys have. So I had a computer where I got mad at it for whatever reason, did bad in the game, kicked it, the hard drive crashed. And I think this was Pentium time, and this was, you know, I definitely had CD-ROM and all that. I couldn't afford a hard drive at all, and I wanted to play games. And I knew somebody whose dad was like the first person we knew in all of Kansas City that had a CD burner. And in hindsight, realizing how much blank disc cost back then, this guy doing this favor for me is actually like probably pissed his dad off. But he would burn just basically the directory of a game that he had installed on his hard drive onto a CD, and did that, you know, several games, however many games he could fit onto a CD. And I actually remember having a CD with like felt like a ton of games, because actually back then CDs had more space than hard drives. So
right, yeah, like was it 600 megs or something, or 700 megs?
So he'd install a game on his computer and then burn it to a CD-ROM, and then I would boot off floppy with all the drivers that I needed, and then navigate to the CD-ROM drive and run the games. Some games absolutely would not run if they couldn't modify some of their files while they were playing.
Right.
But other games would let me play fine. I just couldn't save, and I couldn't edit. There's, you know, some of them had actual startup files, and I couldn't.
Right. So whatever he had put into his installer, like I have a Sound Blaster 16, and
exactly.
I have, you know, VGA, and
so some of them my sound didn't work right because I had a slightly different sound card or something like that. But yeah, that's the biggest feat I ever knew of anyone doing to be able to play games, was having somebody burn them onto a CD-ROM to run the actual installation off of a CD-ROM.
That's awesome.
And you know what? I played. I couldn't save the games, couldn't hear half of them, but I was at least able to play games until I could get a hard drive again.
Oh, that's great.
That's pretty cute. And that was a co-op feat of strength as well.
Yeah. I had a buddy who helped me out. He felt bad for me. I couldn't game. So,
I have a feat of strength story that also revolves around co-op. In particular, a winner and a loser. I was not involved in this, so it's not technically my feat of strength. I may even have told the story before, but I will gladly tell it again. Back in the day, we used to play, a friend of mine would come over, we were still kids, and Doom had come out, and we had a serial cable, so we plugged that in to, one of the computers was a 486, the other was a 386. And whoever lost got to play on the 386. And I sat there, mouth agape, watching my younger brother play on the good machine, on the 486. And it was Doom 2. It was map 50. The big hall with the cyber demon in it. And he lost 50 to -2. And the last shot is really the feat of strength here. Not only was he absolutely terrible, but the last shot was fired from, like, the room with the Fort Commander Keynes in it.
Yeah.
Right. He was in that room. And his opponent was way over on the other side of the map, like straight when you come out of the teleporter from the first room. It was way over on the other side, and he just fired off a rocket just down the hall and just, started running towards him because he just wanted to call him out of the room. And the only thing he heard, he couldn't even see him. He just heard a ah! And the counter went down. I was like, wow. Or the counter went up, sorry. And I was like, wow, that was a 1 in a million shot.
and again, it's 320 by 200, where, that room was a pixel, 1 pixel from that distance.
And the 386, and this is all the more impressive, the 386 was so underpowered to run Doom 2 that it had to run the game in low res. Remember, you could turn on the low res mode. Mm-hmm. That would lengthen the pixels, kind of make it 160 by 200. And just
didn't it actually put borders around it? Like, it shrunk your whole viewing area? Am I correct on that?
No, it just made the whole thing look like an AGI game.
Oh, okay.
Right, and I think you did have that option. At least in Doom 1, you had that option of shrinking your viewport down, so it was like
the first time I played it, I had to shrink it down.
Doom 2 as well, same principle applies.
Yeah.
But that was a feat of strength, and at that point, my younger brother just threw up the headset and just stormed off, and was just like, "Fuck this noise."
So I've got I'm not gonna. My wife would definitely be mad if I call this a feat of strength, but when she calls it, it's the extremes her husband would go to for his computers. This is 2000. This took place. We're barely in the pre-XP era, but by a year it was still pre-XP. But right. We're gonna cable modems had just become available, and it was like as soon as it was available, I signed up for it, and we were on a list. And they're like, well, we'll call you once cable guy can come out. So, weeks later, we're actually at an urgent care room where my wife was. I think she had an ingrown toenail that got kicked or something and cut, and so it was really bad. And we had to go in, and we're in the waiting room for the doctor to see her and fix it. And I get a call, and it's on my brick of a cell phone, and I get a call saying that, hey, the cable guy could be at your house in 15 minutes. Would that work for you? And I'm like, well, not really. When can they come out next? Next month. And I'm like, all right, I'll be there in 15 minutes. So I left my wife with her surgery, minor surgery, but left her, went home, and it took a couple hours at least. And by the time I got back to her, she was actually sitting on the curb because the office had closed. It wasn't actually emergency room; it was urgent care. They had closed.
Right. So they shut down.
Yeah, and it turns out she had a horrible time. They were cauterizing it after removing the ingrown toenail, and they accidentally burned the wrong toe. And so that was her biggest pain, is a not numbed toe had gotten burned. So she was in a really bad mood because of that. And I pull up and I'm all giddy, happy, and like, it's so awesome. And you can't believe.
So I think the feat of strength in this situation is that you're still married.
Exactly. Exactly. And that would,
feat of strength on the part of your wife in this case.
Exactly. Oh, she was pissed for a while about that. And I think when the story still comes up, she's still pissed at me. I'm like, but she did end up loving the cable modem too. So
And now it's up for the world to know.
Sure.
Do you remember the original AMD Athlon processors when they came out? I think it was 2000 or 2001.
I worked in a small computer shop when they came out. Yeah.
So the original ones were slot processors, but then at some point, I think it might have been the Athlon XP, I can't remember which model, switched to a socketed model. Now, the funny thing about that is you could actually unlock it for multiplier so that you can overclock it. But the way you had to do that was you had these 4 contact bridges on the surface of the CPU that you had to somehow connect with like a conductive thing or other. Now, it's worth noting at that point I was probably about 17, and I was working my ass off doing shit work just so I can have the money to buy a new machine. And then I figured, hell, I'm going to overclock the thing. So I did some research, and it turns out you can, it's a classic. The original person who discovered what the bridges are for, in that they unlock the multiplier and allow you to modify the speed in the BIOS, actually used this very, very expensive silver-based conductive pen that you can literally draw like circuit traces with.
Right. Yeah.
And then some random Russian dude just said, hey, use a pencil, and did that. And it works because modern pencils are graphite. And
graphite, right.
Conductive, which makes perfect sense. So I did that to my brand spanking new, extremely expensive Athlon CPU. And it's like, if I fuck this up, I'm so dead, because there is no way anyone will replace it, and there's no way I can afford another one.
Right.
Working at shops, we had to look for that because people would bring back dead chips that they had overclocked and fried. And it's not like now when you overclock a computer and something goes wrong, the computer shuts down on you. If you overclock
it, nope, too hot, too weird.
Sometimes the computer would actually start making a smoking sound.
It was like the early days of the ATX standard, so you basically normally didn't have a sensor like temperature probe on the CPU die. You actually, if you even had one, you typically had like a small thing connected to the motherboard and just stuck somewhere.
Probably like case temperature or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, so it was early days yet, but
right, like now my motherboard has like, if I pop open the BIOS or whatever, it has like 14 temperature sensors and like good fan control. And
things are easy. I'm very happy that I don't have to make a project out of upgrading or even fully rebuilding my PC nowadays. Like, I still have a gaming machine and I put it together on my own, but it's just so much easier nowadays. You don't really need.
No, I mean, today everything pretty much goes in one slot. You can't plug something in backwards and fry it. You can't,
Although compatibility issues have become a lot more kind of common in the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years than the 15 years that preceded them.
Well, yeah, I mean, Craig, you could add.
Rams.
There was some hardware that I remember Sound Blasters just because I worked at a shop, like I said at a point, and we had found we were custom building computers where people just order the parts and we put them together. Like, there was just certain different hardware that we had a network card that had nothing to do with IRQ conflicts or anything like that. But if we had that generic network card with a Sound Blaster sound card, the sound just wouldn't work. And it took us a long time to figure out what was going on and where the problem was. Pulling one thing at a time and seeing if it was working. Until we finally found it was just this crap, Asian import sound card. I'm sorry, network card. Like no brand name at all. We'd pull that thing out, and all of a sudden the sound would work great. And that kind of crap happened a lot. And that's why somebody was talking about their Apple computer they're using right now. Is that's part of why Apple did so good. Hardware-wise, they didn't have any of that. They had their hardware, so we didn't have to worry
about it. It's a set within a very narrow range. It's a set configuration. Like, maybe you'll have the better processor or the worst processor or this much RAM or, a little more RAM. But aside from that, it's like, well, here it is. This is the machine. Here's an OS that is absolutely tailored to this machine. And so,
I think it's less about that and more about not having to actually maintain backwards compatibility with a lot of hardware.
That's the stuff too, right?
Yeah.
That's what kills stability, basically.
No, exactly. I mean, if you look at it on PCs, like, okay, fine. Like you can't run a 16-bit app in Windows now, but
it's tantamount to a miracle that Windows software generally works 10, 15, 20 years after the fact. And I'm not actually, like, if I've implied that I'm riffing on Microsoft on this, actually it's quite the other way around. These guys put heroic efforts into backwards compatibility that no one in the right mind ever should have to deal with.
Well, and we're talking about things, building and stuff like Windows XP in '95. Working at a shop, when somebody ordered a computer and we had to build it, the steps were you put all the hardware together, which is still honestly, it's still about the same. Physically building it is similar.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some things are a little more idiot-proof, but at the end of the day, you're still screwing things into other things. And
corners and cases anymore, thank God.
Yeah, everything's a little more rounded these days.
Yeah, and I don't have to keep I literally have to keep a Band-Aid box by my desk at all times because we're constantly getting a scrape here and there. But so you get it all put together, and then you load your OS, but then you have to get it all working. You have to optimize it all. You have to get your drivers loaded. And 95, 98, we had internet, but it was early internet, so it was. If you needed to update your drivers, it was still a pain in the butt to get online and find a newer driver.
Yeah, you probably still had to. Sometimes some companies you probably had to hit like their FTP site or something. Like it wasn't really. It wasn't like. It wasn't plug and play like now. It's just like, oh well, here you plug this thing in. Here's the driver. If you want.
Some companies. You had to. They mailed you a disc.
Yep.
And you'd call them like we called our distributor for that network card, and they were like, oh okay, well we'll mail you. This disc and that'll fix it. And we wait weeks to get it, and it still didn't work.
Right, it's like, kill me.
You were just screwed. But now
you got this person who's probably paid you like $1,000 for a computer or whatever, and they're like, "Where's my computer? Why isn't it ready?" Right?
Me and my 12-year-old, she wanted to get her own computer to play Minecraft and Overwatch herself, and so we built her computer, loaded Windows, and I went into the drivers to see what drivers I had to load, and Windows 10 had every driver.
Yeah. Pretty much. I mean, I think the only one that sometimes you have to futz around with is, if you want the best, the most current, NVIDIA driver or something, then you install that separately. But just basically everything will work.
Or if you have a webcam and you won't get on Google Hangouts and not sit there for 15 years.
That's some good irony right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though I installed the driver, kept saying, "Nah, fuck off! You're not getting on Google Hangouts with this shit." And then I just,
it's funny.
Went up and turned off. Google Hangouts, it does this red, like angry. The camera is turned off, and I just went up and hit it anyway, just thinking, "Fuck you, I want to go." And the camera turned on. I was like,
while you're telling us this story, your audio's gotten worse than it's been this whole time.
I know, it's the best. Now you're like super robot-y.
That is awesome irony right there.
Which is too bad because Trolls even says Trolls chatted that he has a Space Quest feat, which pertinent to his history.
So is the audio so bad that I shouldn't even bother at this point?
I wouldn't right now unless you're free up your bandwidth somehow.
Try stopping your video and talking, and let's see if that helps. I know we tried that before, but I mean, we looked there. Okay, so now try.
Or he could just save us and just stop talking.
I was thinking that would actually be the pertinent thing to do. It's just not.
It's actually better. It's way better now.
Yeah. Quick, tell your story quick.
Well, in Space Quest 4, because I used to.
It's actually perfect now, by the way.
It's actually perfect. I have no. Maybe it's the wired connection. Maybe I should go on Wi-Fi just to see what happens.
You know what? It's working right now.
Yeah,
there's a very nice picture of you that we're looking at, so we can just deal with that.
Okay, I'm just gonna tell the story and then I'll futz around with it while you guys are talking.
Sure.
In Space Quest 4, because I used to play a lot of Space Quest for some reason. For some reason, yeah. In Space Quest 4, you get in the time pod and you go forward into Space Quest 10 and you land on Estros. And you're supposed to get captured by the pterodactyl, and then you fall into the lake, and then Zandra and the latex babe show up and all of that. If you take too long, futzing around on Estros before you get captured by the pterodactyl, some secret police will show up. And they're really there just to sort of stress you out and hunt you down and say, okay, you're taking too long, just get fucking moving or something. And they probably didn't intend for you to be able to evade them, but having played it way too many times, I actually managed to evade them and got up to their time pod. By a series of events where you have to fall off a ledge, land in the puddle, and then climb back up, and then evade some lasers, all this shit. Got up to their time pod, only to find that no one had thought you'd ever get this far, so you can't actually climb in their time pod and steal it. So that was my feat of strength. I evaded the secret police that you're not supposed to evade on Estros in Space Quest 4. That was a very boring story now that I think about it.
No, that's interesting. You basically found an exploit.
I kind of did.
There's a whole speedrun side community of speedrunners. They try to find exploits or sequence breaking that you do something the game doesn't want you to do so they can get through the game faster. And that's what your story reminded me of, is sequence breaking.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to try and switch away from a wired connection and try and go on Wi-Fi, which sounds like a terrible idea, but might do something. Maybe the cable is broken or some shit.
Sometimes doing the wrong thing is the right thing. So who knows?
So, well, while you play with cables, this is my last story on my list I can think of. I had a buddy who we were in the same apartment complex, same floor, but opposite ends of the apartment. And we wanted to, we loved LAN gaming at the time. And we were like, man, if we could get a network wire between our two apartments, this was, I think it was before Wi-Fi. I'm sure it was before Wi-Fi. It's definitely. So what we ended up doing is waiting till like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when nobody in the apartment complex would be awake. And we actually, in the hallways, and it wasn't just a straight hallway, but, in the hallways, we were pulling up the edge of the corners of the carpet and laying down, rolling a spool of network wire and laying it down into the carpet. And I believe this was when it was coax.
Oh, okay, wow.
No, it wasn't. No, the coax was at a different place. This was also after I got cable modem, so we then figured out how to share my cable network connection once we got wired. But yeah, we were tearing up the carpet in our apartment complex just so that we could have a LAN game.
Oh, that's awesome! Yeah, like I remember my brother did that. My brother did do that with coax for cable, because we obviously had cable coming into the house, on the main TV in the living room. And then I think my dad had like split it, so it went upstairs. And then, eventually he was able to get it into one other room. And then my brother's like, well, I have a TV in my room. He had gotten his hands on some little crappy ass TV. And so he got his hands on some coax and he just ran it through the hallway, upstairs in our bedroom, where our bedrooms were. And he ran it into his room so he would have cable too.
I actually even fished network wire through an air duct where, you had the vent back on when I was all done, but there's a wire going from my computer to the air vent, and then that's going, down to the lower level of the house.
That reminds me of a very, very strange story. So not getting into the details, but back in 2006, Israel had a minor war with the Lebanese militia. So I was working at a software company up north back at the time, and we actually had rockets being fired on us. So what we ended up doing is we moved everyone to like an underground shelter that we had just outside, but we needed internet connectivity to get anything done. So we ran a cable from like the office proper outside over like a bunch of lawns through the air vent of the indoor shelter into the shelter, like behind a bunch of really, really heavy objects in case someone does go off, and just work like that. I still have pictures somewhere, and I'll need to look them up.
Holy crap, man. In Kansas City, people want to go to work with a snowflake, and you got people working with bombs?
I wouldn't recommend it necessarily, but, you know.
Holy crap, man. That's commitment to work, I guess.
Deadlines are deadlines.
Deadlines are deadlines, exactly. And for a second there, I was thinking, nah, he just, you know, they just really wanted to finish that game of Doom that they had going.
Yeah, exactly. And trolls, you're good now. So Wi-Fi seems to have done it.
And that cream's working great. You are super smooth now.
Yeah.
Really?
No blemishes at all. You could use some anti-aliasing, but other than that, you know.
Yeah, I know. My texture mapping is a bit all over the place. I need.
So it almost looks like it didn't listen to your changing the stream quality, because now your video is like it's more pixelated, but your sound is good. So yeah.
And you are that art you talked about. That at this low resolution, your art is beautiful, but then when you go to HD, you know.
Exactly. Maybe it helped that I had to, you know, refresh the Hangouts window. Maybe Hangouts was just getting sick of me, or already is sick of me.
No, you at 240p is a better resolution for us.
There you go. It's
VHS quality.
It's VHS trolls.
Best kind.
You look like your avatar on the Backseat Designers art.
Nice.
Any minute now, a hand is going to come out the screen, and you know, James Woods is going to press his face into me. No one?
Awesome.
All right. Okay. At least one person got that one.
Yes. There's Tomer. You said you had one about you know, to tease the next episode. You have a Defender of the Crown story.
Yeah. Well, right. So I'm not going to say much about the game because listen to the episode, except for the fact
I just received a lengthy voicemail from you. So.
Yeah.
I'm not the only one who leaves lengthy voicemails.
No, this is ridiculous. I need to re-record that, but I'm not promising anything because I'm lazy. So if you want to cut it down for size,
I'm lazy too, so I might not.
It's way.
You let mine run, and I vow to never leave that long voicemails. I'm sober now, so I think that's not going to be a problem.
Yeah, I think I might have picked up the slack on that one. But anyway. So the only two things I'm going to say about Defender of the Crown is that it's an awesome game, and that it originated on the Amiga in 1986. So I saw it for the first time, I think, on the Amiga in 1987, so I was about 4. And it's actually one of my earliest coherent memories, most of which, by the way, are about either dogs or computers for some reason. And I was so blown away by the game that I just wanted to have it. But Israel is a bit weird in computing in that we didn't get any of we got the very early 8-bit computers and then IBM PCs and sort of nothing in between. So Amigas were extremely rare to the point where there were hardly any Amigas at all in Israel. So I could never find one, but when I started collecting computers when I was probably about 14, and when I was 16, I actually came across an Amiga 500 Plus, which I subsequently bought, and I really, 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 really wanted to play Defender of the Crown on it. And it turns out, I basically got the machine a disk for the wrong version of the operating system. And that's it. But the wrong version of the operating system was like the original Amiga OS 1.3 with Amiga Basic. So that's pretty much all I had. And of course, a whole stack of floppy disks that, like, from my PC, so they were completely useless in terms of software. So what ensued was a 3-month experiment where I had to transfer a driver for the old OS that could read DOS disks through a null modem cable connected to a kind of shitty terminal program that I wrote in Amiga Basic just so I can transfer the shit from the PC to the Amiga. Then I used that to bootstrap just bootstrap a way to save disk images to the Amiga. So the first thing I did was I I copied over for the newer version of Amiga OS that actually supported DOS disks out of the box. And then I used that to start transferring over like disk images that I downloaded from emulation sites and stuff, because it was basically pre-internet as we know it, and I had no Amiga stuff in Israel to buy from, to choose from. So
was it like news groups and stuff, or like alt.amiga.software?
BBS is very, very early emulation sites, like Zophar's domain from back in 1990, like 8 or 9. It was ages ago. So yeah, I ended up managing to transfer games over, and the first one I played was Defender of the Crown, of course, because I've been waiting about 12 years to replay that game on an actual Amiga, and it ran too fast because it turns out that it had a timing issue on the newer version of the OS. I actually had to download this software. Like it emulates the ROM and kicks it in an older version, so you can actually use an older version of the ROM with the newer machine, and that allowed me to finally play the game correctly. And that whole process took like 3 months. It was
a feat of strength.
Yes, I think so.
Having the patience to do that.
I don't know. My CD-ROM story was a huge feat. You got me beat, man.
I don't know if that is a feat of strength, but that is a very uncharacteristic feat of determination.
Yeah, exactly.
And also dodging, and also while you're doing it, dodging rockets left and right. Just that is.
Now, that was a few years after.
In our mind, it's all together. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Everything in the '80s all happened at once, like in the same month.
Well, I'm looking up the photo album, and I'm pretty sure it's here somewhere. Oh yeah, here it is. Let me link you to this, just so you can. That was a very strange time to be a software engineer in the north of Israel.
I think you can screen share.
Yeah, just screen share.
I could hypothetically.
These guys do not. You're the only one who looks happy. Everyone else looks like they'd much rather be anywhere else.
Yeah, because of the bombs.
I was very amused.
Well, probably because of the bombs, yes.
Well, rockets, technically, but yeah. That was a very strange time to be in Israel.
I have like the opposite of that story. I have a feat of failure. And I think I may have mentioned this earlier, but as a kid, the Commodore 64 was the first real computer we got. And I was so happy one day when I got my own Commodore 64 and didn't have to use my dad's, and I didn't have to fight with my brother to get on the computer and such. And the first time I tried to turn this thing on, I had accidentally put the power cable into the diskette socket and vice versa, which fried the circuit board, the entire motherboard, rendering it completely and utterly irrevocably dead. And so I had my own Commodore 64 for a total of 20 minutes. That is including the time it took to set the fucking thing up. And boom, I killed it.
I mentioned the story like at a prior Hangout, because I remember it.
I think you mentioned it on Squarewave's episode.
I may have done that as well. It kind of all.
So here, I think if my screen sharing is working, I'm showing. I think I found the picture that you were talking about, Tomer, of
that's the one.
the cable running into the air vent.
Nice.
Yeah, there's actually the Wikipedia. The image Wikipedia shows for that particular war is one in that set.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's impressive.
Well,
that looks awesome.
Yeah, that was very strange. Anyway,
I can only imagine.
I've been to LAN parties that look like that. I once went to a LAN party in a chicken shed. It was for a weekend, and the invitation we just got was show up at this address, and it was a friend of ours, and we'd never been to his house before, like really. And we show up with our computers, and he goes, just come over here. And he leads us away from the main house. And this is sort of like off into, the
yard or whatever.
Yeah, like a forested area, kind of like a farm-ish type of deal.
Are we gonna get raped now? It's probably.
And he leads us into the fucking chicken shed where he set up 2 garden tables inside, like with benches and shit. Set them up inside the chicken shed, and just sort of cornered off the chickens into one corner. Put up some chicken wire so they wouldn't like walk out. But there's like chicken shit everywhere, and there's
so it's like an actual. It wasn't just like a chicken, like, oh, this is the chicken shed, but really we just use it for like to go out and like have picnics in or something. It's like it was an actual like active.
It was
chicken shed.
It was an actual chicken shed, low ceiling, and there were flies everywhere. We spent the entire weekend. In fact, on the first evening, someone went to buy chips and Coke and whatever, and came back with I think we were 8 people, maybe 9 people. Came back with 9 fly swatters, so we could all just sit there and whack the fly swatters when we weren't busy playing.
I was like, we're gonna play Doom, but we're also going to we're also gonna keep track of how many flies we've each swatted.
Yeah, exactly. And at one point, we might have to cut this story for broadcast, but I woke up one morning and went over to turn on my computer, and there were 2 flies fucking on my monitor. One was on top of the other, and there was definite motion going on.
Oh my!
And being the cruel 16-year-old kid I was at the time, I swatted them, killing the one on top, but not the one on the bottom.
And it has to go through the rest of its life having this traumatic experience.
30 seconds rest of its life because we put that out of its misery. But it was just so pathetic watching this fly crawl around with another dead fly on top of it, trying to get off my computer monitor. It was awful.
Oh God.
Denmark must be a boring place.
I don't know. You were just there. You tell me.
Yeah, no, it's not. But I mean, that's flies. Yeah. Sorry.
We had a LAN party.
That is the sort of thing that sticks in your memory. Disturbing. I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, I like how you guys top stories about. I thought the craziest LAN party we had at the Chuck E. Cheese. We actually used arcade monitors as our gaming monitors, because that time they were starting to put VGA connectors on arcade monitors. And it turned out it was kind of uncomfortable because you either were sitting in a racing game with a keyboard and mouse on your lap, or you were having to put a table in front of a fighting game. But
they've got these things here now at our movie theaters where they actually hook up, like they'll hook up a console to like the projector, and you can play on like the movie screen, which I've never been to, but I figure that might be pretty fancy.
At one of the theaters I go to, I won't name any names, but they played Mario Kart on the Wii, on the projector to the big
That's pretty awesome.
big screen for the movie theater after hours. And I've managed to acquire not a movie quality projector, but a projector, and our family plays Mario Kart split screen on that. And now we can't play on a smaller TV because each of us has our own 60-inch screen on our 4-way split, And
there you go. Yeah, it's like you're a quarter of the wall.
Yeah, exactly. Quarter of the wall is a lot of space.
Yeah.
The only way we could top that is if one of us got one of those Omnimax, like movie screens, like you got in the planetariums and shit. It just covers like one edge of the wall and it goes all the way around.
Yeah, it's like
180,
crazy like dome or something.
Yeah, the original IMAX before IMAX just meant big.
Yeah. I actually went to a concert. This is not game related, but I went to a concert at the Copenhagen Planetarium, where the synth band was playing, and they actually for some reason were allowed to play. It was like a private showcase or whatever, and somehow I managed to con my way in there. And they used like the Omnimax screen to like project you moving across the surface of Mars while they were playing this 80s synthy rock style. It was awesome. Sorry, that was a complete misjudgment of topic.
Those were awesome experiences.
Yeah. Anyways, Tomer, you said you have another thing, and then we'll probably start wrapping up around then. So go for it.
I don't know what exactly brought it to mind, but I just remember that same workplace, we had a thing, like that was basically the first place I had a chance to try out a mechanical keyboard. And then one of my colleagues there had a tip that it's kind of a foreclosure warehouse, but not exactly. So it's basically a warehouse where government and defense industry companies and bodies, basically when they need to get rid of hardware like hard drives and old computer hardware, technical equipment, that sort of thing, they send it there to be scrapped.
Right.
And one of those ran a probably in retrospect kind of illicit side business of reselling some of that stuff to anyone who knew enough to come knocking.
Right.
So we went there, like 3 or 4 of us, and they showed us into this humongous hangar, and then actually walked us outside to what was basically a junkyard. And there was a big container, like open container, with the biggest pile of IBM Model M keyboards you have ever seen. There's been like 500 of them. So, but they were, obviously exposed to the elements. They've been out there for God knows how long, probably years at that point. So we picked up like 10 or 20 of the kind of best or best kept looking keyboards
from the bottom of the pile.
We searched through it for a good half hour just to come up with like 10 reasonable looking candidates, or maybe a little bit more than that. Took them back, cleaned the shit out of them, dried them off, pulled them apart, put them together. We basically managed to scrounge up 3 or 4 working keyboards and a whole bunch of like replacement caps and stuff out of that. And it cost nothing. It was like maybe $30 in total, the whole thing. So we ended up with like 4 Model M keyboards that are actually kind of a rarity these days, and are still some of the most awesome keyboards I've ever used. By the way, if you want a modern Model M, Unicomp makes keyboards called customizers that are basically modern Model M's with like USB and Windows keys. They're pretty good, although not quite as sturdy and hardy as the real like Lexmark or IBM Model M's from the 80s. Because
right, you can't like beat down a home invader with them. Yeah.
My mom was running a Model M with an AT to PS2 adapter and then a PS2 to USB adapter. But her newest computer, for some reason, something in that configuration, it reads an F2 press on boot. So every time her computer reboots, it goes to BIOS on her new computer. So we finally had to get her a different keyboard. But yeah, I mean, those things will run forever and ever and ever.
And they're amazing keyboards. They really, really are. Although
I know my buddy Brian, the space game junkie. I believe he's got a Model M that he loves, and he took it all apart a couple weeks back or a couple months back and cleaned everything. And because I guess you have to maintain it if you want to keep it.
You don't really have to maintain it, but like if it starts acting up on you, then you basically just take a flathead screwdriver, take off the caps, clean it up, and it works again. It's ridiculously reliable. Like think like 70s Volvo or something, like a car that doesn't break down no matter what, and it's the keyboard equivalent of it.
Right. I'm thinking like the refrigerator that Indiana Jones hid in. Like you could basically climb into a Model M keyboard, you could survive a nuclear blast.
You just need to like put it in front of your face and you'll be okay.
Well, yeah, hold up the keyboard in front of your face going, give me all you got.
Those keyboards weighed like 6 pounds because they had this thick metal plate inside them to actually keep them, like hold them sturdy in place and give you a better tactile feel. And it works, but you can also like bash someone's head in, as I mentioned, and probably just bash someone's head in, put the keyboard on the table, keep on working. It's all good.
For some reason, I imagine a Jason Bourne scene where he does that or something.
My dad used to work for Sennheiser, and he came home with a set of headphones that he was really proud of, and he showed me the cord in particular that he was totally proud of, and he just looks me straight in the eye and beams like someone just told me he won the lottery, and he goes, "You can strangle a man with this." I was like, okay, it's got tensile strength. I'm good. I've actually got a related story on the finding weird shit, but again, it's the polar opposite of Tomer's story. a bunch of us when we were teenagers got really drunk, and then you wake up in some remote house. You don't know how you got there, and you go for a stroll trying to find a bus station or something, and we come across this yard sale, and it's they got a bunch of shit like lamps and boxes of weird vinyl records and shit, and they've got 2 Commodore 64s sitting out in front, and no one is around, and it just has this cardboard sign next to them going, "Take what you need." I'm like, okay, so
I need it all. I need everything.
I'm gonna take this Commodore 64. I'm gonna carry it home. And I come home and I say, and I'm hungover, and I go into my dad's room and go, look what I found. And he's just like, wait, you went out at 7 o'clock last night and got really drunk, and you come home with a Commodore 64. Who'd you rob? How did this? But anyway, we find all the power supplies and shit, because this is after my fiasco with destroying my own Commodore 64 in the span of 20 minutes. So he's like really wary about this. We find all the connectors, put this thing in, find an old CRT monitor, plug the whole thing up, try and turn it on, and nothing happens. And we're like, that's weird. And then we sort of try different things, turning it on and off again, and all of a sudden we get this sort of burnt smell coming off of it, and he's like, nah, this is weird. So he gets a screwdriver, cracks the thing open, and inside is what I'm sure was supposed to be the remnants of the onboard, motherboard, circuit board, but it's covered in sawdust.
Oh.
There's sawdust everywhere. It's like someone built a hamster cage inside of this Commodore 64, and it will never run again. Because when we turned it on, apparently we set fire to some of this, hay, sawdust stuff that was in there, and it was non-operative in the first place, but now it was completely fucked up. So yeah, another great paperweight in the Commodore 64 collection of my household.
Amazing. Well, does anyone have any other stories that they want to get out before we wrap things up, or shall we start winding down?
You can have a feat of failure story.
Carrying
I'm the only one who's telling feat of failure stories.
Carrying a 21. I have 2. One is short.
Sure.
So carrying a 21-inch CRT to a LAN party can be considered a feat of strength.
Yes, literally.
Those things.
Oh, no. Carrying the entire computer case with keyboard and the CRT monitor in this huge duffel bag that's used to carry ice hockey sticks. We carried that up to the 6th floor of an apartment building every weekend for over a year. My brother and I, we did that. Sorry. Didn't mean to.
Thank God for LCD monitors and gaming laptops.
Yes.
So this kind of a feat of strength, also a feat of failure, and I need to be a little bit careful because it has to do with my army days. But way back when, don't get me wrong, army is bullshit, right? I was a software engineer for the army. It's not anything fancy.
You did the training and then you wrote code.
Kind of. So I was bringing in a new server to our computer room, to our data center, and it was one of those really freaking heavy like ATU servers. I don't know if you ever got to carry one of these. They weigh like 100 pounds or more. It's like 55 kilos. It's crazy heavy. So you don't
fit a small person into it.
No, but you can mash a small person with it. So you don't carry that around on your own, because although you might be physically able to, you really shouldn't. But moreover, if you screw it up, then it's really expensive. You don't do that. So I was carrying it with a colleague of mine, and I was the one walking backwards, kind of holding on to the thing. We were walking in the data center, and evidently, like earlier that day, they did some maintenance on the cabling or something, and they lifted up one of the floor tiles. It's like a floating.
Yeah, it's a floating floor so that you can get to all the power and the data stuff. And
exactly. So someone lifted one of those, and it's like 2 feet by 2 feet almost. It's pretty substantial. And I was walking back straight into that and not noticing, obviously. And I fell backwards with the really heavy server. And as I was basically thinking, oh shit, something blocked my fall, while I was still more or less upright. And I look back, and it's this humongous IBM mainframe. And the funny thing about the humongous IBM mainframes is that they have the same big red power switch that the old IBM PCs used to have. the one that is very big and has a very satisfying like thunk.
Clunk, clunk. Yeah.
So it has one of those, and it's used for the exact same purpose. And my shoulder is basically up against it, and it's already kind of bringing it down slowly but surely. I'm like, I can feel that I'm like right at the threshold where I take down Israeli military intelligence, which is not good. So I tell my colleague, like, Eyal, step back really, really slowly. And I kind of try to lift my shoulder up, and that thing weighs a ton. It's like ridiculously heavy. It's like, and trying to step over the void on the floor without like turning off the mainframe that I'm leaning.
Right.
So
that's amazing.
It's a feat. There's strength involved, but it's also very close to being a very, very tragic story, I think.
Yes, a very big failure.
You almost turned off all of the Israeli military intelligence units. That is, I cannot top that. No one can.
That would probably be exaggerating a little bit, but I couldn't tell.
Let me live with that. Let me live with that.
By how not as much as it might otherwise be.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I think that's a good note to end on, unless anyone's got anything.
Yeah, I don't think we can top that one.
I was gonna share a story of destroying 37 19-inch CRT monitors, but that's still not as.
I mean, let's do it.
When I worked at the computer shop, I hired a buddy as my warehouse guy, and we had a big order of, remember when 19-inch CRT monitors was the biggest feasible monitor you could really buy.
Yeah, like I had a 21, but it was stupid. Like,
yeah, that's why
I upgraded. My next monitor after the 21 was a 19, with the nice flat screen. And
yeah, so the warehouse guy decided we had a big order of those monitors, and he was going to try to stack 37 of them on a pallet, and he did it. He did 9 by 9 by 9 by 9, like 4 stacks.
This massive cube of monitors.
Yeah, and in hindsight, he should have done the Saran wrap before he lifted the pallet with his pallet jack. But when he lifted it, the sides bowed. So I guess he didn't destroy, all 37, but he had a 3 by 3 grid for each level, but the left 3 all stacked up 4 high, and the right 3 all stacked up 4 high. So yeah, I guess 24 monitors fell in both directions, smashing down on the ground. And I hear the smash, and I go running back there, and monitors are everywhere. And he's sitting on one of them. They're in box. He's sitting on one of them. He's just smoking. And, he can't smoke in the warehouse. But, at that point, he didn't care. He just it's like, no, I'm done. Just sat down. Just
like, whatever.
And I couldn't help but just laugh, dude. I mean, the scene of this guy with monitors just scattered everywhere. Because when they fell, they didn't just fall. They slid, too. Just monitors all over right in front of the dock, and he's just sitting on one of them smoking a cigarette.
Like, whatever.
What did you do?
Fuck it, I'm fired anyway. Screw it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, if you're not firing me over the monitors, you're not firing me over a cigarette.
Yeah, the boss was out that day. We went ahead and piled them up and sent them, and just waited to see which ones came back.
It's like, which ones came back? I was like, oh, I don't know. It must have been damaged in shipping.
So that company's closed now, so I'm not afraid to admit that now.
Worst thing like that I ever did was I dropped an entire rack of French fries at McDonald's when I worked at McDonald's.
And served them.
When you said rack, I thought you were talking about server or something.
No.
I had a buddy who did espresso machines and coffee machines, and installed a coffee machine in an office complex, and there was already a hose coming out of the wall where they wanted to hook it up, so he just used their hose. And it's a big no-no because their hose was not rated for high temp, and he did this on a Friday, and then Monday morning it turns out that hose had busted and was leaking water, and right below them was a big server room.
Oh gosh.
And so just all weekend it was just spilling water through the floor all over the servers.
Drip, drip, drip.
Luckily his company was insured, but his boss literally didn't speak to him verbally for like a week, I think.
Good morning, Joe. Fuck you.
Yeah, like he got all the orders by email. There was nothing, no verbal interaction at all.
Amazing. All right. Well, I think that's good. That turned out better than I thought, because I think we all sort of came in going, oh, feats of strength. What does that really mean? But I think we sort of defined it.
Yeah,
even trolls, whose idea it was.
Feats of failures.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. This was super fun, and I'm glad we, as always, get together and chat about these things. And we have had a nice little group and whatever. So the next show, I know it was supposed to come out before this one, but hey, what's the difference? Is going to be on Defender of the Crown. I wanted to give myself enough time to a much deeper game than you think it is, really. A lot to it. But yeah, next episode 103 is going to be Defender of the Crown. I know there's a lot of you, Tomer, Jim included. I have emails for both of you guys. And yeah, so let's look forward to that. Probably the next week or two, because like I said, I've been putting it off long enough. And yeah, if you want to find anything about the show, as always, umbcast.com. How about you guys? We can go down the list if anyone wants to talk about any of their stuff. They got anything? Brian? And we don't have a lot, but
No. This was a blast.
okay. Craig, we haven't heard from you a ton today, but anywhere you wanna point us to?
Hi, I'm the Space Quest historian. No, I've got nothing.
Wonderful. Tomer?
Two things I want to plug, neither of which is mine. First is just to get a head start on Trolls, the Backseat Designers, which is has just come to the conclusion of its 4th season and is a highly recommended podcast.
Wonderful, wonderful show.
Now Trolls can actually have fun with the fact that they have a concrete fan. Yeah, well, I'm actually a Patreon supporter of both shows, so I can safely do that. Also, a couple of YouTube channels you might be interested in if you're all into retro hardware and gaming, that sort of thing.
We don't like any of that crap.
Well, 3 actually channels. There's the 8-Bit Guy, which is highly recommended and is always a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
He does like frustration videos of old computers and various other things. It's pretty good stuff.
Frustration videos. Well, I figured that would be mine as motherboards. He even make frustration videos.
Well, a few of these to be sure. There's Techmoan, which is a little bit similar, but
Techno rules.
yeah, focus more on like gadgets, audio stuff. Pretty good stuff. I learned a lot about some audio and video formats that I had never even known existed. And then there's
vinyl records even more than me. It's weird.
Yeah. And then there's retro game mods if you're kind of more into the serious restoration and electrical engineering stuff. I bet Brian probably knows that channel pretty well.
Yep.
It's really, really good. If you want to, like, I learned more watching a couple shows of that channel about electronics and how to deal with old hardware than I did basically the rest of my life combined. So it's pretty good stuff.
Awesome.
That's it.
All right. And Trolls, how about you? You went a little crusty again, but let's see how it sounds now.
That's just my nose. It's dripping into the microphone. I've got a bunch of shit I could point you to, but seeing as I'm in someone else's house, I'm just going to say that Joe and I recently finished recording our commentary for Star Trek: The Next Generation of Final Unity, and those episodes, when they're edited together, should go up on my YouTube channel very soon. So basically, youtube.com/SpaceQuestHistorian is where you'll find that. And Joe,
awesome, and yeah, those were super fun.
Yeah, Joe was a lot of fun to comment with, and it kind of turned into a DVD commentary style playthrough, which is it's not a let's play. It's just basically us commenting over pre-recorded gameplay footage, and it kind of
and we sort of like let it ride. Like we let the game sort of go under us, and we just sort of talk about other stuff, and then we're like, oh, and all this stuff just happened. And some of it, exactly. Some of it was okay, and the game looks weird.
It's very nerdy, and the game in the upcoming episodes, the game crashes on me, and I have to fix the sound blaster driver, and it's tons of fun if you enjoy me being miserable at games. So yeah, that's it. And I moved my live streams. I should probably mention that because I'm playing Life is Strange. There's a live stream coming out tomorrow at 2 p.m. CET on twitch.tv/SpaceQuestHistorian. That should be fun. So drop by if anyone wants to see me fail at a game that is ridiculously easy.
Amazing. And before we head off, I showed this before, but I grabbed a cider as my second drink by accident, which ended up being not that bad. But I think they're like inspired. This is like the Salmon Max, like the Salmon Max cider. It's not, but it's a local Toronto cider. But this rabbit guy always sort of reminds me of Max.
It's kind of like Max meets that bunny from Donnie Darko.
Yeah, pretty much. So, anyways, so that's that. Thanks everyone, and super fun hangout as always. We'll have another one in in a couple months, and we'll come up with another interesting topic and all that. So thank you guys. Thanks, folks, for, I don't know if anyone watched live, probably not, but folks for listening and watching and all that. And now I'm gonna scurry over to the other computer and turn off the stream. So thanks again.
Let's play them up, guys. Okay, I'm the only one.